Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics Football. It's Fran here, and we're finally back with our first kind of UCL fantasy video. So I've admittedly not done this before, but of course I've been an avid watcher of the Champions League, and I have been kind of reading into the rules the last few days and looking into historical performances of specific players and what makes interesting assets and what I think is slightly different from FPL. Of course, is that this UCL format does follow quite closely to the Euro format that I think we all quite enjoyed. As a bit of a break from FPL, it gives you a bit more leniency in terms of the substitutions, but it also benefits people who kind of stay around to the deadline sometimes and observe some teams. So, for example, all the asterisks on some of these players on the spreadsheet relate to teams that play the early game. In terms of Man United and Sevilla, who are both those kind of two bigger teams, I would say, who are playing an early game, and will probably also have a little bit of rotation as well, given the fact that they have somewhat deeper benches. And this will also allow you to kind of adjust your team and maybe even play cheaper options such as Diogo Dalot at 4.5, Lingard at 6.0, or even someone like Juan Mata at 5.5. But without further ado, welcome back to the channel. If you were a Euro player, or if you're an FPL fan who also likes like Champions League, welcome. This is just a place where I think I would say it is a bit more fun, to be honest, because FPL is a long kind of seasonal grind. But the Champions League is a nice place to kind of see intercontinental football and also enjoy it by having some punts on UCL fantasy. And I think the idea with this video is to kind of create a team selection guide and a cheat sheet for you guys and explain my selections. I haven't gone with any players that I would avoid right now. I think there's just plenty of players who are good and at differential prices. But just to actually explain my philosophy in terms of how I approach team selection this year, I think is that with the kind of benefit of the man of match points, we're looking at actually for the first time DMs, someone like Kante, for example, being extremely rewarded for good performances. Now, of course, Kante is rumored to be injured and will probably miss the Zenit game, but in the future, we could be looking at fantastic performances from Kante being rewarded. Players like Casemiro and Fabinho as well being rewarded for their routinely good performances, which is in addition to what last year's rule edition was, which was, I think, basically an additional point for every 3 ball recoveries that you make as a player, which definitely benefits central defensive mids, some fullbacks, and also mostly centre backs. So if we actually look at the kind of way I've structured the team sheet, it is split between Matchday 1 and Matchday 2. This is kind of or rather not Matchday 1 and Matchday 2, but day 1 and day 2 of Matchday 1 in general. And the idea is, I think, just to give you a bit of a picture in terms of when you're building teams, who's playing on the first day and who's playing the second day. This is very important, for example, when you look at the keepers and notice that if, let's say, you want to have one budget keeper, he should be playing on the opposite day to the keeper who's playing or who's your premium keeper. So, for example, if you go for Mendy, you probably want to go for Stekelenburg. But the issue with Stekelenburg right now is that he's injury. I think he might be injured. And so, for example, it could be better to go for Ederson and someone like Lakodimos from Benfica as well. So that's kind of an interesting kind of variation that I think you have compared to FPL, where you're not really reliant on your bench at all unless you have a bench boost, just to let you know. But I think if we start from the forwards, because I think the keepers are relatively routine, I can actually let you observe the keepers. We're still looking at really some of the top keepers in the world. They're very obvious in my opinion. But in terms of the forwards, I think this is, of course, where a lot of people will be kind of putting a lot of thought into this, because ultimately we have fantastic premiums and they're all kind of well priced. The difference, I think, with FPL is here you're actually allowed, in my opinion, UCL Fantasy to actually go for the 3 premiums, because none of the premiums are initially priced at a ridiculous price of 12 plus or 12.5, and that actually allows you to have more space and breathing room, and you see that reflected as well within the defense. I think the midfield, by contrast, is actually very overpriced, which is why I will also suggest a different formation when I actually finally review my team selection. But for forwards, I would say you're actually probably best off going with 3 premiums. If you want to have a bit more team balance, if you want some more differential picks, you can definitely go for that. I wouldn't recommend it myself. I'm not really a big fan of that kind of setup, but I can totally see it working out, because if you, for example, want to go for Salah, who I definitely think is the only kind of true mid premium that I think makes sense in this game, then I'm all for it, to be honest, if you want to go for that structure. But I do think Lukaku probably has the best game in Matchday 1, to be honest. Whilst, of course, Ronaldo has returned, and he is playing, I would say, quite a weak opponent in Young Boys, so is Lukaku equally in Zenit. And I think what we've seen so far is this Chelsea team, in terms of depth, is incredible. Reece James could be someone who could be featuring, who had showed great link-up play with Lukaku. Mount was someone who was rotated out recently. So, for example, Chelsea have some players rested as well for this game. and they're probably ready to kind of attack this fixture. And we saw even under Lampard, Chelsea really dominating the group stages, and Giroud was the better factor of that. And I think Lukaku is a clear upgrade, and we can definitely see the fruits of that with the Lukaku captaincy in game week 1 or match day 1 and day 1. And with Lewandowski, I think you can't deny him. I have to put him there as the best pick, but I do think he somewhat pales due to the fact that he's playing Barcelona. Now, of course, the last time we saw Barcelona versus Bayern, that was a different picture, and you definitely would have captained Lewandowski if you're looking retrospectively. But I would say that this Barca side has improved slightly. I don't think they're defensively as weak in the midfield because they have much more static, much more kind of dynamic players, in my opinion, at this point in time, with Pedri and De Jong and even Busquets, who's at least allowed to play the role that he wants to play without having to kind of cater for players like Rakitic and Vidal, who are slightly past their prime and unable to keep with the intensity of Bayern's press. And then with Nesri, I would just say he's a simple differential where, once again, if you want to go for someone like Salah, and you'd probably want to go for someone who I think is a talismanic player for Sevilla, to be honest. He had a fantastic goal-scoring season in the domestic leagues last year. He could be an interesting differential in that sense. But I personally would say Lukaku is the most interesting one. Although I would say just in general, the group stages probably benefit all three of these key players. They have very, very lovely fixtures in general. For day 2, I would actually think that you could probably fit, Haaland into your team. I think, he clearly is the future kind of Champions League player. And you can see, I mean, it's not just a meme about the kind of Champions League music and him playing it around wherever he is. But like, ultimately, he's proven himself to be able to score in any kind of stage. And I think when he's, for example, given like an easier opponent, he definitely doesn't take it lightly. And I think, versus Besiktas, you have that kind of opportunity there for Haaland to really call. And I think you have the faith as well with Dortmund having a rather easy group, in my personal opinion, where Haaland can hold. And you don't have to worry about the fact that Dortmund is a bit of a weak, kind of defensively fragile team. They're still a team that is capable of creating a lot of chances. And I think Haaland makes a lot of sense. I think also you probably want to pick your second player in this match day as well. Your kind of third premium if you're going for the 3-striker premium setup. And I think both Mbappe and Benzema make a little bit more sense than Messi at this point in time. I think Messi seems to be somewhat resting at times with PSG. I'm not exactly sure the full extent of his role. He probably will start, given the fact that Di Maria is suspended. But I think it's still something to be seen, to be honest. And I think Benzema is potentially the most informed player in Europe right now. He has 5 goals, 4 assists in 4 games, which is a ridiculous kind of stat line. He is playing Inter Milan at their home. But I would also kind of raise a point where, Real Madrid were fantastic last season playing this Inter Milan side, and they actually beat them both times with, I think, Benzema having goal contributions in both games. Whereas someone like Vinicius is kind of emerging as a player and has shown to kind of provide a lot of strength for Real Madrid lately on the left, with Hazard kind of playing on the right due to the fact that Gareth Bale has recently succumbed to injury. With Jota, who is a forward, I think, unfortunately, the reality of the situation is that he does somewhat pale in comparison to some of the other players. And I personally would just go for, Salah if I was actually looking for a premium, just due to the fact that, eventually, I mean, if you're not planning to wildcard, for example, you're going to have to deal with maybe transferring Jota out when you actually don't want to. Whereas with all the other premiums, they're pretty much good to go for the rest of the group stage. And that's how you really want it to be, barring some kind of unforeseen injuries. In terms of the midfielders, I think, as I said, I do really favor a premium defensive structure and a premium offensive structure, which actually means that you're probably going to leave a lot of space in the midfield to actually go for some DMs who could get man of the matches, who could also get a lot of ball recoveries and also even clean sheets for some of the teams that they play for. Given the fact that there's such a large disparity between some of the Champions League teams and some of the qualifying teams from some of the non-top 5 nations, you will have these kind of disparate matches where the scorelines could be 5-0, 4-0, and ultimately these kind of players can play a part, whether it's ball recoveries, where it's an assist or a random goal here or there, or a man of the match performance, to be honest. And I think a player like Jorginho is very representative of what Conte produced last season on the way to his Champions League triumph, where Conte was constantly winning these man of the matches. And I think with Conte out especially, Jorginho is not in that kind of position to do that. He also takes penalties for Chelsea. Very interesting pick. Musiala comes in as an interesting pick and a best pick for me because of the fact that Gnabry is now injured. And I think he probably will be rested for this game, which means Musiala could definitely provide a threat versus Barcelona. I do consider him to be more of a 1-week punt, but at 6.5 and him being such a kind of I think, intelligent attacking player, and he's shown it on a national stage as well. He becomes very interesting. I would say that most of the Man United midfielders, I think, are incredibly overpriced, with the exception to Bruno, who I think is almost priced well. Like, if you consider the fact that penalties might be taken off of him. Bruno, we know, can still be a creative force in the league. He also showed us a fantastic long shot the other day. I mean, he has a lot of tools in his arsenal, to be honest, and we know that's why he is such a fantastic FPL asset. For me, I think he makes a little bit of sense, but I think when you compare him to Salah, I would still say the fact that they're evenly priced just means Salah makes a bit more sense. Obviously, Salah has the tougher fixture, but as I said, with the premiums, you're looking for someone to keep for the long haul. And I just don't think Fernandes at this stage makes sense, especially when you have a comparison to Ronaldo at 0.5, and the difference is so slim there. With Pogba and Greenwood, I still think they're slightly overpriced. And once again, I don't really favor going too deep into the midfield, which is why I also consider, I think, Mount as a differential. Now, of course, Mount is incredibly rested. He could get maybe 2 assists. He is playing versus weaker teams, and that is a huge benefit for Mount. So maybe Mount makes sense for you if you can actually suddenly, maybe let's say, go for one cheaper defender and go for Mount. But I would put him as a differential right now. Fred, I put there simply because, as I said, you're going to be looking for players at the 5.5 to the 4.5 to the 4.0 range to actually fill gaps in your team. And if you can actually have a 5.5 player or a 5.0 player playing for a big team who could probably get a clean sheet versus a rather weak side, that's quite beneficial, right? And once again, you have the chance to also kind of observe what the Fred actually does play. You can maybe make changes regardless, based on that kind of structure. And you can get a feel for maybe whether Ole is going to rotate this season in the Champions League group stage, given the fact that they have arguably an easier group than last season. Definitely no PSG in there, at least. In day 2, I think Salah and Grealish are probably the best kind of creative options that you can actually consider as premiums. Grealish kind of follows his FPL price, where I think he is a nailed Man City player, and I think he's almost set for like a 1 goal per game kind of ratio. And I think there are times, of course, where he can also contribute maybe 2 assists or even 1 goal in the game, and that's simply due to the fact that Man City truly overwhelms some teams, and you will have those kind of disparities, right? When you compare, I think, how Man City really stacks up to like Club Brugge, for example, or even Leipzig. And of course, they play Leipzig first, but I think, Grealish is someone who, as I said as well, you can kind of keep for the long haul in the group stage if you actually think that you can balance your structure around him. I wouldn't say he's an absolute must-have pick at 8.0. I still rate a lot of defenders somewhat more highly than him, even some defenders in his own team, and that's probably why I would stave off from Grealish. But I think if you're looking for kind of a midfield balancer, someone alongside Ferran Torres, it could be quite interesting. And that's simply because I think, he kind of has the license right now as Pep to be one of those undisputed starters, which is a similar situation to, something that KDB benefited from. And I think he's also kind of relishing the chance to play in his first Champions League. It could be a kind of big breakout moment for him as well to play on this kind of intercontinental level. With Casemiro, I think, once again, he benefits from potentially the man-of-match performances. He is a talismanic player for Real Madrid on the defensive end, and he could get those additional points there. On top of that, I think, he clearly is pretty much nailed to play all the games. I don't think Real Madrid are looking, for example, for Alaba to really rotate with him. Alaba is someone who is kind of interchanging between left back and centre back at times now. And because of that, also due to the fact that I think Alaba is slightly injured, Casemiro pretty much locks in that spot. And I think at 6.5, he once again is someone who's kind of rounding out your team, perhaps, if you decided to go for a much more stronger defense. And, he's a lovely player to have because he's a Real Madrid player who will probably benefit as well. And actually keep in mind that in the last few years of his career, he's actually outscored both Modric and Toni Kroos. So that's quite an interesting thing as a Real Madrid midfielder to kind of be aware of. Marcos Llorente, I think, is actually one of the best priced players in the game at 6.0. This was Atleti's arguably key player of the season. I think their key signing, of course, was Suarez, but the breakout player of the year, was definitely Marcos Llorente across La Liga, to be honest. With exception to Benzema and Messi, he was definitely the third best player in the league. And I think, yes, maybe whilst Griezmann has come back into the team, there are some more attacking options now, and maybe he plays a little bit deeper than usual. At 6.0, I think he's one of those workhorses where he can contribute a goal and assist and be worth that kind of 6.0 price, and I think that's why he has so much value. On top of that, he could benefit from additional clean sheet points and the recoveries as well, since he also has a defensive mid background, to be honest, and he's that kind of all-round hexagon player who can provide you those additional points and could, as we saw in previous big fixtures, can step up on occasion and really haul Atletico out of these tough spots. With Fabinho, I think once again he's more of a gap filler, as I can see. And the same with kind of Danilo from PSG. Danilo benefits from the fact that Gaya from PSG is suspended, and he kind of plays that lone DM role, which is absolutely needed in that team to create some balance. Edson Alvarez is someone who once again fills gap filling at 4.5, and I think he makes more sense than some of the other players that we've seen, given the fact that Ajax is a relatively nice group with Besiktas and Sporting in it. KDB, I think, has to be a differential. I think the fact that he's more expensive than Salah does kind of show the fact that, of course, a lot of the pricing is based on the fact that he probably was weighted to have much more man of the matches in the group stages, or rather in the playoff stages in the previous season, and I can completely understand that. But with him kind of resting from injury, he might even be playing this game, but it would be very minimal minutes. I think he would be more of a watch list player at this point. Tadic, I think, is a little bit too overpriced, but if you have some faith in Ajax, then fair enough. Bellingham for me is much more interesting. Bellingham is someone who's extremely interesting to me because he has shown to be a very attacking centre mid. I think he always kind of makes these late runs into the box like Lampard. We saw that in the kind of Man City kind of pivotal games, and I think he has made big strides as a player in terms of how he actually contributes to goals and assists. And I think we've seen that both in England when he's played in some of the friendly matches where he's gotten to play full games, and we've also seen that especially for Dortmund, where in that kind of second half of the season last year where they were actually turning the tide, he was one of those players who really stepped up and actually kind of maintained his starting position, and he's continued that kind of form this year. And with Gio Reyna especially going out, I think that means that Bellingham probably has a little bit more of license to push forward as well, which is a really huge benefit for him. Valverde is someone who I see as almost like I wouldn't say a downgrade to Casemiro, but someone who plays an interesting hybrid role for Real Madrid. Right now, with Gareth Bale being injured, they're almost playing a 4-4-2 system, and that means that Valverde is almost playing like a shadow right mid, some kind of role that I think he actually played very similarly for Zidane. But I am seeing him kind of attack a little bit more, and we saw him kind of provide an assist the other day versus Celta Vigo, and I think he interests me as a Real Madrid fan, to be honest, because I think he is someone who is always very good at decision making in the box. He doesn't necessarily get a lot of chances, but when he is there, he will make the correct decision and usually will contribute to the attack in some positive way. And in that as well, you could look at man of the match worthy performances as well from him. I think he is that type of player as well, who's similar to kind of Jorginho and Kante, could both provide these kind of defensive masterclasses or even offensive masterclasses at times when it's unexpected for them to actually really benefit in the UCL. Ferran Torres I've kind of downgraded a little bit because I think that this is probably the stage where he kind of gets rotated. I think Pep will probably maybe take a bit more priority in the league because I think he does think that the City team can walk over the Champions League. I know that's not the right mentality to have, and I'm pretty sure Pep doesn't have that mentality. Obviously, he respects the teams that he plays, but I do think this is, if Torres is supposed to be a talismanic player in the league, I think he as a young player definitely needs time to rest, and I think the time to rest would probably be in the Champions League. I might be wrong about that. Torres might play, but I do think that there's a risk that he might be more prone to rotation in the Champions League than that. And I think Luka Modric, we all know the class that he has as a player, but I think at 7.5, once again, I say the overpriced mids is a very kind of recurrent theme in the game right now with the pricing, which is why I'm so much more interested to kind of talk to you about defenders. In day one, you have Shaw, who's I think very interesting. He really benefits from the fact that Telles has an injury and Brandon Williams is out on loan, which means that you get to have Shaw versus young boys. It's a fantastic opportunity for him to really kind of flex his muscles in terms of getting assists and huge kind of opportunities for him to get fantastic hauls at a very good price, to be honest. Acuna as well is someone who's incredibly interesting at 4.5. I think Acuna, is one of those devastating options who we're looking at basically a fullback from a team who I would say could be positioned first or second in the group, and we don't really have that when we actually span across some of the other teams, with the exception maybe Mikel Gutierrez from Real Madrid, to be honest, who kind of only recently kind of rose to that position. Acuna is at 4.5. He does play a little bit more defensively for Sevilla, but I think he still plays a pivotal role for a team that could definitely get clean sheets. He could get recoveries as well, and will kind of chip in for the occasional assist. And I think from that alone, at 4.5, you're looking at a fantastic value for a player. Kimmich, we all know what he has. He plays basically midfield for Bayern. I have no idea why he's priced as a defender. I couldn't tell you why myself. But he started the season off fantastically with Nagelsmann, and that's what really excites me the most. I think Nagelsmann, is a very tactically adept manager, and I think any manager who has the chance to play with Kimmich is going to enjoy that, and I think he will kind of use Kimmich to his full potential. And at 6.5, you're probably looking at a player who's going to be contributory to some really devastating scorelines. And he's also cheaper than Goretzka, to be honest, and that's really what it comes down to for me. I think he has much more of a creative touch, perhaps less of a goal scoring one, but I think at that cheaper price, he's fantastic. Plus, he gets those kind of clean sheets whenever they do come. Reece James, 5.5. I mean, that's a fantastic price for him. It follows his FPL price, but I think we all know that he, when he plays, is way more worth than 5.5. And the same goes for Marcos Alonso, which is why they're both kind of green picks. I think there's not much need to kind of discuss them too much. We know that when Chelsea stretches teams out wide, most teams actually can't deal with it because there are too many threats kind of in between the kind of half spaces with Havertz and Mount as well, drifting in those positions. And with Lukaku being the receiver of these chances now, all these Chelsea players do benefit now. You can see 100% their assist rate is going to go up this season just due to the class that I think Lukaku brings. I mean, you saw his finishes versus Aston Villa the other day, and you can tell that these Chelsea players will thrive off playing Lukaku, and that's pretty much what it comes down to. With Davies, I'd say, he's a differential because I think Kimmich is still a better option, 6.5. He does provide slightly more, I think, interest for me as a creative player. Davies clearly is preferred by Nagelsmann as well, and I think he has returned to kind of fine form. So I think if you perhaps need a bit of a budget saving, then there's that there, right, at 6.0. I wouldn't really recommend kind of doubling up on a Man U defender, but I would still put it as a differential. I think they're all reasonably well priced, to be honest, but we're still looking at Chelsea players being similarly priced. Nothing too interesting there. With Navas, Roussillon, we're looking at players who I think Roussillon actually plays, I think, in a much weaker group, but I think he has the opportunity to kind of start in a group and potentially even steal, 1 or 2 clean sheets and provide really good value as a 4.0 player. The only other thing is I think Miguel Gutierrez, as I said, is someone who can do, or Miguel Gutierrez, sorry, is someone who can actually do extremely well, as a 4.0 pick. And if he wasn't there, then I would say Roussillon is super interesting at 4.0. Piliqueta, I think he actually gets a lot of priority from Tuchel to actually play big games. He was rested as well versus Aston Villa reasonably. He played a few minutes. But I think I would expect Piliqueta to start in those kind of bigger UCL games. We have to still kind of wait and see how Tuchel's attitude to kind of rotation is, but I think that's pretty much how the situation is. With Trent, Hakimi, Cancelo, and Diaz, that's where you have like the full kind of package in terms of defenders, and they all come in day 2. But one thing I would actually say is like don't get afraid of players playing on day 2 because simply put, the biggest kind of issue with having to split your players between day 1 and day 2 is really just kind of getting the captaincy right. Once you get the captaincy right, everything kind of falls into place, to be honest. You do want to have a few kind of players play on day 2 to kind of cover your day 1 failures or just to kind of fill gaps. But I mean, ultimately, I think what we can see right now is that most of the stronger teams, I think, are playing within day 2, mostly because, let's say, Bayern and Barcelona are, for example, kind of matched up and head to head, sorry, in day 1. So it leaves you with a lot of interesting players who have great fixtures in day 2, and I think you probably have to pick most of your defensive pool from there. The differentials as a result are going to be players from either like second option players or either players from teams that I think don't maybe kind of provide such a good defensive base, because while I would argue that Liverpool and Chelsea and teams like Man City or even PSG, to be honest, have a very strong defensive base in my opinion, the rest of the teams in the tournament don't necessarily do, Bayern as well maybe. So that's why you can kind of see that I've maybe rated Dortmund a bit lower, Diego Carlos a little bit lower, and Walker a little bit lower just because he's clearly a second option, just like VVD to Trent. The only kind of other option, as I mentioned, with Miguel Gutierrez is just that he's a 4.0 simply because he's a Real Madrid player, could be a starter. Marcelo seems to have actually lost his starting position to him, potentially. Maybe it's due to the fact that he's slowly recovering from injury as well and not fully fit to play, but he's an interesting player to kind of keep an eye out on and also just have as an interesting 4.0 option as well. In terms of keepers, I've already explained them, so I don't think I want to get too far deep into it. I think we only have 4 realistic options in my personal opinion. I wouldn't really want to touch Oblak or Courtois right now. I think Oblak is a little bit overpriced, and I think Courtois does play for a Real Madrid side who have now kind of switched completely their MO from the last season. They've now turned into a very heavily attacking side and a side that can actually leak goals whenever and wherever they want, and that's pretty much what it comes down to. You might also notice that there's a recurrent theme with me kind of not actually including any Serie A players, and simply But I just think that the level of Serie A has dropped quite recently. I also think a lot of the teams actually placed in the Champions League have not started the season off well, or have a lot of changes that have meant that some of the talismanic options in the previous years no longer exist in the Champions League. For example, Inter losing Lukaku, AC Milan still a little bit tough to kind of pick options from. I wouldn't really pick Zlatan or Rafael Leao, for example, who are the top talismanic players over some of the premiums that we have. With Juventus, they've started very poorly. Chiesa might be an injury prone target, and ultimately they haven't looked good. Same with Atalanta, who also kind of rotate very heavily, even with their strikers, for example, and that makes them very tough to deal with. When you have such kind of nailed players in other teams, and that's pretty much what it comes down to. My watch list has Tsimikas and Mori because I do feel like these players could maybe benefit from rotation in their teams, as I mentioned, and Depay for sure. I mean, Barcelona players would be one to just generally look out for as we head from Matchday 2 onwards, but I definitely wouldn't start the season with Matchday 1 with having a Barcelona player. But if there was one Barcelona player that I have to give a shout out to, is Depay. I think he's in world-class form right now, and I just pretty much have to say that he's one to look at. To actually look at my team, if I show you my team, I've actually gone for a 5-back kind of like 5-2-3 structure where a lot of my replacements are just going to be these midfielders who I think could maybe get solid man of the match performances from teams that have a strong defensive base, with maybe the exception of Real Madrid, right? Ederson is someone who comes in because I had the issue with Stecklenburg, and as a result, Benfica keeper is also my bench. I wanted to go with a premium, basically full-back line. I've opted to kind of skip the Man City players because I do think if there's a chance for Pep to rotate, it would probably be in the Champions League. I know Cancelo and Diaz are super interesting options, and I probably will kind of maybe reconsider that on the deadline tomorrow. Let's say if there's a shock where, let's say, Shaw doesn't play, as an example. But I think I'm more than likely going to stay with the structure. The only thing that will ever change is probably the fact that I might go for another Man City defender. But I already have Man City, in a sense, covered by Ederson. They also have a slightly, I think, maybe tougher matchup with Leipzig, who definitely, in my opinion, can score a goal versus Man City, but will probably still be overwhelmed. My midfield, of course, is incredibly weak. You can tell with Alvarez and Fred that's, of course, not the ideal kind of midfield partnership that you want to have, and perhaps you could argue the bench is quite weak as well. But I think that's because you're benefited by the fact that you have great captaincies on day 1 and day 2. You have a fantastic front line, and truly, I think this defense can outscore most kind of strong midfield setups who boast a comparable price, right? Because most people would be fielding maybe like 3 backs or 4 backs, and I feel like that additional defender, whoever it is, who has a fantastic game week, will probably outscore most midfielders in this game. As we see, for example, in FPL as an example, where it doesn't even factor in man of the match performances and ball recoveries, which I think both defenders can potentially earn. We're looking at performances where defenders with a clean sheet can easily get upwards of 10 points very easily. And that's something we saw, I think, as a recurring theme in the Euro Cup, where, for example, when we saw such a strong defensive team like England and we had options like Luke Shaw, they're fantastic picks. And I mean, I pretty much replicated this structure, I think, on a much more aggressive scale here, and that's why I've gone for this 5-2-3 structure. The premiums at the top, I don't really have to explain individually why I picked them. Perhaps people kind of question why I don't have Messi, why I don't have Lewandowski and Ronaldo, but I think it just simply comes down to how good the opening fixtures are, how fit some of the players are as well, and simply put, how kind of well built their teams are for the Champions League, or individually how well built some players are, such as Haaland, who I think is at his prime and is so young that you can pretty much capitalize on the fact that he will be hungry for those goals. And that's pretty much it. That's my team selection video. I hope the general guide helped. And I hope you guys enjoy the kind of Champions League games ahead. I'll definitely be watching them, and I'll see you guys next week.